The first thing Harven Graye noticed when he woke up on the Viridian Research Vessel was the smell. Not that it was bad, more like sterile flowers dipped in cold metal, but it was definitely not earth. He sat up slowly on his cot, wincing as the synthetic blanket shifted against his arm. The rash had spread overnight. Great, he muttered, scratching lightly at the red, blistered skin snaking from his wrist to his elbow. Of all the things to bring into space, I bring poison ivy. The door hissed open and in floated Zarnex, the alien trainee assigned to Earth biology and cultural observation. Zarnex was tall, with a translucent green hue and a way of blinking one eye at a time that Harven still hadn't gotten used to. "You are awake," Zarnex said, drifting closer. "Your epidermal hue has mutated further." "Fascinating." "Yeah, it's called a rash," Harven replied. "You know, like skin irritation. It itches like hell." Zarnex leaned in, his ocular ridges pulsing slightly. "You were exposed to Earth flora. This is a consequence." "Poison ivy," Harven said, lifting his arm. "Stuff's harmless to you, apparently, but to us it's like nature's way of saying screw you. Zarnex tilted his head sideways. "Poison ivy. The plant that secretes urushiol. I read about it. Delivers no toxins fatal to your kind. Merely discomfort." "Discomfort?" Harven raised an eyebrow. "I haven't slept properly in 2 nights. I've scratched until I bled twice, and I think I'm starting to see shapes in the walls. But sure, just discomfort." Zarnex emitted a series of short chirps that Harven had learned to interpret as laughter. "You laugh now," Harven said, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. "But wait until you accidentally touch it. Then let's see how funny this is." "I am immune to urushiol," Zarnex said, still vibrating slightly with amusement. "Of course you are." Harven stood, grabbing his jacket. "I need something for this. That ointment you gave me yesterday made it worse." "Because it was designed for species with silicon-based dermis," Zarnex said. "Then maybe don't use it on me?" Zarnex's eye blinked again. "I am still learning." "No kidding." The infirmary was 3 corridors down from the human quarters. Zarnex hovered beside Harven as they moved through the ship, occasionally stopping to greet other crew members. Most of them were alien. Of course, humans were still fairly new to the intergalactic exchange program. Harven was one of only 3 aboard the Viridian vessel, and the only one currently not confined to bed rest. The other 2 had come down with something that made their lungs whistle. When they reached the infirmary, the lead medic, a bulbous creature named Driln, greeted them with a warbling chirp. "Human Graye," Driln said. "The rash has expanded?" "Like mold on bread," Harven replied. "Got anything that won't melt my skin this time?" Driln consulted a hovering screen. "We have imported Earth-based antihistamines. They are stored in Biocompartment 7. Finally, Harven muttered, sitting down while Driln floated to the back of the room. Zarnex stood silently, watching Harven scratch at his arm. After a pause, he said, "Why do your species engage in outdoor recreational activity when your environment contains so many hazards?" Harven looked up. "Because it's fun. We like hiking, camping, being out in nature. Sometimes we know there's poison ivy around and we go anyway. But why? Because it's worth it, I guess." Zarnex blinked both eyes simultaneously, a rare occurrence. "Even with the risk of epidermal inflammation?" "Yeah. Sometimes you just need to be outside, even if it means suffering a little." Driln returned, holding a small vial of pinkish liquid. "Apply this topically twice daily. Symptoms should subside within 72 Earth hours." "Thanks, document." Harven took the vial and stood. "Let's hope this doesn't make me grow scales or something." "That would be fascinating," Zarnex said. Harven gave him a look. "You're enjoying this way too much." Later that day, Harven was in the botanical bay, helping Zarnex catalog Earth plant samples. The bay was humid and buzzing with artificial sunlight. Rows of containment pods held familiar ferns, mosses, and flowering plants. Zarnex was especially interested in the poison ivy sample Harven had collected before boarding the ship. It sat in a sealed pod, glistening innocently. "You willingly harvested this specimen?" Zarnex asked, peering into the pod. "I wore gloves. Mostly. That explains the rash." Harven rolled his eyes. "No kidding." Zarnex removed the containment lid to extract a leaf for analysis. Harven took a step back instinctively. "Relax," Zarnex said. "I am immune. Just don't touch me after you touch that thing." "I will not." For the next hour, they worked in silence. Harven adjusted the moisture levels in the pod while Zarnex ran molecular scans. Occasionally, Zarnex would ask a question about Earth soil or seasonal growth cycles. Harven answered as best he could, but the itch on his arm was becoming unbearable again. Eventually, Harven excused himself and returned to his quarters to apply the ointment. He sat on the edge of his bed, carefully unscrewing the cap and dabbing a bit onto the worst of the blisters. The relief was immediate, and for the first time in days, he felt a little hope. Just as he was replacing the cap, a loud clang echoed from the hallway. He opened the door to find Zarnex lying on the floor, writhing oddly, his skin flickering between shades of green and blue. Zarnex. Harven dropped to his knees. What happened? Zarnex's voice was weak. I may have ingested trace amounts of urushiol. Harven blinked. You what? I attempted to taste the leaf for biochemical calibration. You ate poison ivy. Not the whole leaf. Just a small bite. Harven stared at him. Are you serious? I wish to understand the human reaction. You're insane. I may be ill. No kidding. With effort, Harven dragged Zarnex to the infirmary. Drilln was alarmed and immediately began scanning him. His neural response is hyper-elevated. Internal membranes are inflamed. He is experiencing a systemic allergic reaction. Harven folded his arms. But I thought he was immune? Clearly, that assumption was incorrect, Drilln said. Zarnex moaned softly. I wish I had not laughed. Yeah, Harven said. Me too. Drilln administered a serum that stabilized Zarnex's vitals, but informed them that recovery might take several days. You'll need to stay in the med bay, Drilln told Zarnex. Zarnex turned to Harven. Does this mean I now understand your discomfort? Harven sighed. I think you've earned it. Back in his quarters later that night, Harven lay on his bunk, his arm bandaged and finally not itching. He stared at the ceiling and chuckled quietly. Alien laughs at human Rash, he said. Then eats poison ivy and nearly dies. That's one for the books. He rolled over and closed his eyes, already dreading tomorrow's shift in the botanical bay. The next rotation cycle began with a klaxon that sounded like a bored goose coughing into a tuba. Harven slapped the wall panel beside his cot, silencing it, and swung his legs down slowly. His arm felt better, still puffy, still pink, but the burning had dulled to a manageable throb. He could finally flex his fingers without wanting to scream. He pulled on a clean uniform and stepped into the corridor, nearly colliding with a crate hovering midair. A Krauxy technician guided it with 2 spindly arms while its other 6 limbs managed a bundle of cables, a glowing diagnostic tablet, and what looked suspiciously like a jar of peanut butter. Watch it, Harven muttered, sidestepping. The Krauxy gave a low vibration, which Harven had learned translated roughly to, you were in the way, not me. He rolled his eyes and continued toward the biolab. The doors hissed open to a scene of utter disarray. 2 containment pods had been pulled apart, exposing their infiltration systems. A row of diagnostic charts flickered with error codes. In the center of it all stood Zarnex, upright but wrapped in a thermal stabilization harness, his skin still tinged a mottled blue-green. You're supposed to be resting, Harven said, stepping over a spilled tray of nutrient powder. I was resting. Then I grew restless. You nearly poisoned yourself with a leaf. I felt fine 6 hours ago. Mostly. Zarnex adjusted a clamp on his torso. I experienced a minor hallucination involving a sentient fern, but it seemed friendly. You've got a wild definition of fine. Zarnex waved a limb at the damaged pods. I attempted self-repair of the filtration matrix. I believe I inverted the polarity of the CO2 scrubbers. You think? Harven crouched beside the main console and began rerouting the airflow manually. The interface wasn't exactly intuitive, designed for appendages with more joints than he had fingers, but he jury-rigged worse. After a few minutes of tapping and cursing, the alarm silenced and the screen stabilized. You're welcome, he said, standing and rubbing his arm. Zarnex tilted his head. I am beginning to suspect that human problem-solving involves a significant amount of improvisation. Because it does. We don't always have the luxury of a 100-year research projection. Fascinating. Would you say this improvisational behavior is instinctive or cultivated? Harven grabbed a stool and sat heavily. Depends. Sometimes it's desperation. Other times it's just that no one taught us how to do it right, so we figure it out as we go. Zarnex stared at him for a long moment. Is it effective? Look around. We're still alive. Zarnex adjusted a vent panel with exaggerated care. I am beginning to understand why your species is feared in simulation war games. They simulate wars with us. Frequently. You always win, usually by accident. That tracks. Footsteps echoed from the corridor, a quick staccato rhythm that meant only one thing. Someone from command. Harven stood just as Trelvin entered, her segmented armor gleaming in the artificial light. Trelvin wasn't what you'd call approachable. Her species, the Sanctari, had evolved in low-gravity environments, and she moved with a disconcerting glide, like a hunting spider skimming ice. Harven Graye. Trainee Zarnex. You interfered with scheduled biolab maintenance. Zarnex straightened. The filtration matrix failed. I attempted corrective procedures. You are not certified for solo override. I believe the malfunction was minor. Trelvin's four eyes narrowed. Belief does not authorize action. Harven stepped in. He was trying to help. The scrubbers were venting unfiltered air. I fixed it. You are not certified either. No, but I have lungs. And I'd rather not learn what breathing raw nitrogen feels like. Trelvin turned toward him fully. Your interference will be noted. However, your actions prevented a larger systems failure. Mitigating report will reflect this. Harven gave a half nod, then looked to Zarnex. You okay standing? Or are you about to faceplant again? I am stable. Good. Trelvin tapped her wrist console. You are both reassigned. A supply anomaly has been flagged in cargo hold 16. Report immediately. Harven groaned. Why is it always the cargo holds? Every time something smells weird or glows in the dark, it's in a cargo hold. Because that is where anomalies manifest. Go. They made their way down the corridor, Zarnex moving slower than usual. Harven kept an eye on him, noting the occasional flicker in his skin color still not fully recovered. Cargo hold 16, Harven said as they approached. Last time I was here, someone mislabeled a crate of dried kelp as protein wafers. The entire kitchen staff got seaweed smoothies for a week. Zarnex scanned the access panel. This time, the manifest indicates a containment breach. Of what? Unspecified. That's why it's an anomaly. The door slid open, revealing a dim, cavernous space stacked with crates, barrels, and sealed pots. A faint hum pulsed through the air, barely audible but unsettling. Harven took a cautious step inside. Anything in here that wants to eat us? Unclear. Fantastic. They moved between aisles of cargo, scanning for any irregularities. About halfway in, Zarnex stopped suddenly. Here. This crate's seal is broken. Harven stepped closer. The metal lid had warped outward, as if something inside had pushed with significant force. He reached up and tapped the side. Feels warm. Zarnex scanned it. Internal temperature is elevated beyond safety parameters. Contents are organic. Define organic. Not machine. Helpful. Harven pried the lid open with a crowbar from the wall mount. A rush of warm air escaped, carrying a sharp, minty scent. Inside was a tangled mass of vines, thick, glossy, and visibly pulsing. Tell me that's not moving, Harven said. It is. Slightly. What the hell is it? Zarnex consulted the manifest again. Item listed as foliage sample Delta 79. Origin, Earth. Harven leaned in, squinting. That's not poison ivy, is it? No. This is kudzu. Harven stared at the vines. You imported kudzu? It was requested by the Botanical Exchange Division. Kudzu's invasive. You can't just toss it in a box and hope for the best. It was sealed. Not sealed enough. The vines shifted again, subtly. One tendril uncoiled and grazed the edge of the crate. Back up, Harven said. Now. Zarnex stepped away just as a second tendril slithered out, wrapping around the crowbar. I think it's trying to anchor itself, Harven muttered. We need to contain it. Fast. Zarnex activated his comm, requesting emergency quarantine protocol in cargo hold 16. Foliage specimen is active. The response was static, followed by a high-pitched tone. Comms are being jammed, Zarnex said. Of course they are. Harven grabbed a canister from a nearby shelf. Is this nitrogen? Pressurized. Do not discharge it near. Harven popped the valve, aiming it at the crate. A blast of cold vapor enveloped the vines, which recoiled sluggishly. They don't like the cold, he said. Good. Together, they retrieved 2 more canisters, dousing the plant until it stilled and began to stiffen. Zarnex resealed the lid, this time fastening it with a makeshift clamp from a broken rail. You think it's dead? Unlikely. Dormant, perhaps. Remind me to never let Earth plants leave orbit again. Zarnex nodded. Your flora is surprisingly aggressive. You haven't met nettles. They exited the cargo hold just as Trelvin arrived with 2 security drones in tow. She surveyed the scene, then turned to Harven. You discharged unauthorized cryo agents. Yeah, and it worked. Trelvin paused. Noted. As they walked back to their quarters, Harven glanced at Zarnex. Still think poison ivy's funny? Zarnex didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I am rapidly revising my stance on all Earth vegetation. By the next day cycle, Zarnex's hue had stabilized to a consistent jade green, and his posture no longer wobbled like a half-cooked pudding. Harven found him stationed in the galley, staring intently at a cup of steaming liquid while a group of off-duty crew tried to ignore the faint aroma of scorched algae. You trying to hypnotize your tea? Harven dropped into the seat across from him, his tray clattering faintly. I am evaluating the optimal cooling threshold for consumption, Zarnex replied. My previous attempt resulted in minor lip trauma. You burned your mouth? Extensively. Harven picked up a spoon and poked at the slab of protein loaf on his tray. Well, at least it wasn't caused by a houseplant this time. Zarnex tapped the rim of his cup. I have come to the conclusion that Earth biological matter, particularly flora, is not to be underestimated. You think? Zarnex's eye ridges flared. Harven had learned this meant he was trying to convey sincerity. I underestimated the seriousness of your initial condition. The rash. Harven raised an eyebrow. I made an error in minimizing your discomfort, Zarnex added. I have since reviewed the records on urushiol exposure. It is not merely an inconvenience. Apology accepted, Harven said, scooping a bite of the protein loaf into his mouth. It tasted like someone had tried to simulate roast chicken using sea sponge and regret. Zarnex hesitated, then asked, Does it still itch? Nah, cleared up overnight. That ointment from Drilln actually worked. Took the swelling down too. I can finally bend my arm without feeling like it's wrapped in barbed wire. Zarnex nodded slowly. Remarkable. Your immune system exhibited impressive recovery speed. Yeah, well, necessity. I've got work detail in the ventilation shaft clusters after this. Zarnex blinked both eyes. You are returning to active duty so soon? Someone has to recalibrate the duct regulators. They've been pulling in condensed vapor from the engine coolant lines. Makes half the crew cough like they swallowed a foghorn. But your dermal tissue is still vulnerable. Bandaged and sealed. I'll wear the full suit. Relax. Zarnex tilted his head. Your consensus for relax seems structurally incompatible with your behavior. Before Harven could reply, a pale-skinned Crixery engineer squeezed past their table, muttering something about reverse polarity in the hydration pumps. The galley had grown noisier, but Zarnex seemed unusually still, as if waiting for something. Then he said, I would like to accompany you to the shaft clusters. Harven paused mid-bite. You're still recovering. My vitals have normalized. Movement will aid circulation. Also, I wish to observe your method of adaptive mechanical intervention. Harven looked at him. You mean fixing stuff with things that weren't meant to fix it? Zarnex nodded. Precisely. All right. But if you touch any vines again, I'm leaving you there. Half an hour later, they stood in the narrow entrance to the shaft tunnels. Harven had strapped himself into a full-body maintenance suit, complete with an insulated hood and magnetic boots. Zarnex wore a light exo harness to support his limbs in the lower gravity zones. You keep your limbs clear, Harven said, unsealing the first hatch. These fans spin fast enough to turn your fingers into abstract art. Understood. They descended into the shaft, which narrowed quickly into a crawlspace lit by flickering yellow strips. The hum of the ventilation fans echoed through the metal, and condensation dripped in rhythmic taps from the overhead pipes. Harven reached the first junction and crouched, unscrewing a panel with a multi-tool that had clearly been assembled from at least 3 different species toolkits. Zarnex observed closely. How do you know which components to adjust? I don't, Harven replied. But I've been in enough of these to recognize when something smells wrong. This one's pulling air too fast means the intake regulator's stuck open. He reached in and flicked a toggle. A metallic thunk echoed through the shaft, followed by a noticeable drop in pressure. There. That'll stop the backflow. Zarnex blinked once. How did you know? Because I could feel it in my ears. Same way you can tell the ship's shifted orbit, you feel it before you read it. Zarnex nodded. That is not taught in our technical manuals. Harven grinned. Most of the important stuff isn't. They moved deeper into the shaft, stopping at intervals to adjust flow gates and reseal worn filters. At one point, Zarnex held a wire bundle steady while Harven patched a cracked sheath with a strip of thermal tape and a paperclip. "We've got better tools," Zarnex said. "Yeah, but the paperclip fits perfectly. You carry them intentionally?" "Always. Never know when you'll need to defuse a coffee machine or open a stuck airlock." Zarnex considered that. "You solve problems in ways we do not anticipate. Welcome to being human." By the time they reached the final junction, Harven's suit was damp with sweat, and he'd scraped his shoulder squeezing past a pressure valve. But the airflow had stabilized, and the condensation had stopped dripping. As they crawled back toward the main shaft, Zarnex said, "I believe I understand now." "Understand what?" "Why your species is so difficult to predict. You adapt not by resisting your environment, but by integrating with it, even when it's hostile." Harven laughed. "You make it sound noble." "Mostly we just don't like being told we can't touch things." They emerged from the shaft into the main corridor. Harven peeled off the hood of his suit and ran a hand through his damp hair. Zarnex looked at him. "You were bleeding." Harven glanced at his shoulder. The scrape had torn through the suit's inner lining, and a thin streak of blood had dried along his upper arm. "Damn. Must have caught the edge of a fan mount. You require medical assistance." "Nah, it's shallow. I'll clean it up, slap a sealant patch on it. Good as new." Zarnex's eye ridges narrowed. "You treat injury with remarkable casualness. Because panicking doesn't help. You patch, you rest, you learn. That's the cycle." Zarnex was silent for a moment, then said, "I will revise my reports accordingly." Harven raised an eyebrow. "Reports? My study of human biological resilience. I had underestimated the psychological component." "Well, don't leave out the part where you poisoned yourself trying to eat a leaf. I will include it in the appendix." They returned to the infirmary long enough for Harven to clean the wound and apply a sterile patch. Drilln gave him a silent glance that Harven chose to interpret as approval, then returned to cataloging samples from a recent asteroid survey. Later, as they sat once again in the galley, eating something vaguely resembling curry, Zarnex asked, "Will you return to Earth after this mission?" "Eventually," Harven said. "But I don't think I'll stay. There's too much out here to see." "You are not deterred by the risks?" Harven leaned back. "Risks make it interesting. You can't discover anything new if you're afraid to get scratched on the way." Zarnex looked down at his tray. "I believe I am beginning to appreciate that point of view." "Good. Just remember next time you want to understand something human, maybe try asking before you lick it." Zarnex's ridges pulsed faintly. "Duly noted."